Hey, so tonight we're diving into something pretty wild. What hygiene actually looked like during the time of the Black Plague. And trust me, after you hear this, you're going to have a whole new appreciation for things like clean running water and hand sanitizer. Also, if you've been enjoying these kinds of stories, a like or subscribe would really mean a lot. And I'm super curious. Where are you tuning in from? Drop your location and the current time in the comments. It always amazes me that people are falling asleep to this from all over the world. Now, go ahead and find that cozy little spot. Take a long, slow breath. Let your whole body just sink into wherever you're lying. Because we're about to take a trip back to Europe in the 14th century. Yep, congratulations. You've just woken up in medieval Europe. The year is 1347. Your eyes flutter open in the dim morning light, slipping in through the cracks of your small wooden cottage. You're not snuggled up on a plush mattress with soft sheets. Nope. You're curled up on a sack of straw on the floor, sharing the little warmth there is with your entire family. That musty, earthy scent filling your nose? You honestly can't even remember the last time the straw was changed. As you shift your weight, it crunches beneath you. Tiny bites itch across your skin. You scratch them without a second thought. Fleas and lice? They're not just pests. They're part of everyday life. Everyone's got them, from the poorest peasant to the wealthiest noble. Sure, the upper class might swap out their bedding more often, but the bugs? They don't care about status. You hear a faint rustle. Rats. They're everywhere. In the walls, crawling under the floorboards, nesting in the thatched roofs. You see them running through the muddy streets, darting into granaries, lurking in barns. But nobody gives them a second glance. They're just another everyday presence, like the smoke from fires or the muck in the roads. You slowly sit up, back sore from the hard floor. Around you, the rest of the family still sleeps. Your spouse, your children, maybe even your parents or in-laws, all crammed into one room. The shared body heat keeps the morning chill away. As for privacy, that's not really something that exists in 1347, not for regular folks anyway. There's at least some good news. Most mornings you do manage to wash your hands and face. Contrary to popular belief, people in the Middle Ages weren't completely oblivious to cleanliness. They did what they could, when they could. The bad news? That water you're using, it's from the same well everyone around here uses. And to be honest, it's pretty questionable. You splash your face with cold water from a wooden basin. Soap? Well, not the kind you'd find in stores today. Making soap is a tedious process involving ashes and animal fat, and most people can't be bothered with it every day. The wealthy might have fancier olive oil-based soap, but for you, staying disease-free is already enough of a challenge. Sickness is always in the air: fevers, flux, coughing fits, consumption. Life is fragile, and almost every family has buried a child, maybe more. It's heartbreaking, but it's a reality everyone lives with. You step outside to relieve yourself. If you're lucky, your home has a designated spot. A simple hole in the ground, maybe a bucket. If not, or if it's freezing outside, there's probably a chamber pot hidden under the bed. Either way, your waste doesn't go far. It might be dumped into the nearest street, or if you're a bit more mindful, carried off to a nearby stream or river. Yep, the same rivers and streams where people wash their clothes and collect drinking water. See the issue? The streets themselves? Let's just say they're not winning any awards for cleanliness. In the cities, roads are narrow and filled with everything people don't want inside their homes. Human waste, animal droppings, rotting food scraps. The stench would probably knock a modern person flat. But to you, it's just normal. That's what the world smells like. Some towns do have laws against tossing garbage into the streets, but enforcement? Pretty rare. In many places, pigs wander around freely, munching on garbage. It's not glamorous, but in a weird way, it helps keep the streets somewhat manageable. You make your way to the community well to fetch the day's water. There, women gather, catching up on gossip and sharing news. This is your version of social media, word of mouth, passing from person to person. "Have you heard about the sickness down south?" one woman whispers. "They say hundreds are dying. It's punishment from God," another says solemnly. "I heard the Jews are poisoning the wells," a third murmurs, eyes darting. You shiver a little, despite the warming sun. Illnesses are nothing new, but the dread in their voices is different, more urgent. You try to shake the feeling. There's work to do, animals to tend, fields to plow, meals to prepare. Life doesn't stop for fear. Back home, you eat a piece of dense dark bread. Maybe wash it down with a mug of ale. Yes, ale, for breakfast. Water isn't always safe to drink, but ale, thanks to the brewing process, usually is. Even the kids drink it, though theirs is weaker. As for your teeth, they're probably not in great shape. No toothbrushes, no floss. Maybe you rub them with a cloth or chew a twig to clean them. Some people rinse with vinegar or wine. The wealthy might mix herbs or honey for a fresher scent. But when toothaches hit, they hit hard. Most times, the only solution is to yank the tooth out. As the day unfolds, you dive into your trade, maybe crafting, farming, or selling goods in a bustling market. Whatever your job, it's tough, physical work. Dirt and sweat cling to your skin. And despite what many think, people in the Middle Ages did bathe, just not daily. How often you wash depends on your status, the season, your location, and water access. In towns, there are public bathhouses, places to clean up, chat, eat, and relax. Some are split by gender, some aren't. Some are known for other activities, if you catch my meaning. The wealthy might bathe in large wooden tubs, with servants hauling warm water. If you're less fortunate, you might take a dip in a nearby stream or settle for a quick rinse now and then. But bathing is starting to fall out of favor. More and more physicians believe that bathing opens your pores and lets sickness in, especially hot water. And after what's about to happen, this idea is going to stick around for a long time. You move through your day surrounded by smells that modern people couldn't handle. Body odor, animal droppings, smoke, rotting food, leather tanning, dye vats. It's not a single scent, it's a symphony, an ever-present background noise of your world. You've adapted to it. Some folks carry scented pomanders, small balls of herbs or flowers, to hold near their noses in particularly nasty areas. Others tuck fragrant plants into their clothing. The rich might wear expensive perfumes, but most just deal with it. As the sun dips lower, you might wander to the local tavern for stronger ale and some company. News spreads slowly, but it does spread. Pilgrims, traders, travelers. They bring whispers from other lands. And the whispers now, they're frightening. They say a monstrous disease is sweeping through Mediterranean cities. It may have started in the east, China, maybe India, and traveled along trade routes. They say it kills fast and painfully, and no one knows how to stop it. Some are calling it the Great Mortality. Later, history will remember it as the Black Death. But for now, as you sip your drink, listening to hushed voices and frightened speculation, you don't know the full weight of what's coming. You're standing at the edge of one of the deadliest pandemics in human history, and now, all those hygiene habits we just talked about, they're about to face their ultimate test. The year is 1347, and the plague has just made its way into Europe. It's October. 12 ships arrive at the Sicilian port of Messina. They've traveled from the Black Sea, carrying not just goods and supplies, but something far more sinister, something invisible, silent, and deadly. Most of the sailors on board are either already dead or in the final stages of a terrifying illness. The few still breathing are barely conscious, their bodies covered in dark, swollen boils that leak blood and pus. The local authorities, shocked by what they see, rush to expel the ships from the harbor. But it's already far too late. The Black Death has officially landed on European soil. From there, it spreads like wildfire. First across Sicily, then north to mainland Italy. The disease leaps the Mediterranean to North Africa. By 1348, it's ravaging France, Spain, and Portugal. 1 year later, in 1349, it has reached England, Scotland, Ireland, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, Germany, and large swaths of Eastern Europe. No one understands what's truly happening. The concept of germs, bacteria, or viruses. That knowledge is still centuries away. Microscopes haven't even been invented yet. The idea that something microscopic and alive could invade your body and make you ill. To the medieval mind, it would have sounded like a wild tale from a storybook. So people looked for other explanations. The most accepted theory at the time was that of miasma, bad air. The belief was that foul odors rising from rotting organic matter carried disease through the air. And while it wasn't completely wrong, places with worse sanitation did tend to suffer more sickness. It missed the real cause. Other explanations were far less grounded in science. Many believed the plague was divine retribution for humanity's collective sins. Some accused specific groups, most infamously the Jewish population, leading to brutal and widespread persecution. Others thought the stars and planets had aligned in an unlucky formation, casting sickness across the land. A few even believed that just looking into the eyes of a plague victim could infect you. With no true understanding of the disease, fear took over, and with good reason. The symptoms of the plague were horrifying. The most common form, bubonic plague, involved extremely painful swelling of the lymph nodes, usually in the neck, armpits, or groin. These buboes could swell to the size of apples, turning dark as they filled with pus and blood. But that wasn't all. Victims also experienced high fevers, uncontrollable vomiting, delirium, and bruised bleeding skin that turned a deep black. There was also pneumonic plague, which attacked the lungs and spread directly through coughing or sneezing. And the most lethal version of all, septicemic plague, infected the bloodstream. None of these had a cure. With no antibiotics or medical technology, the death toll was staggering. In certain towns, as many as 80% of infected people died. Overall, historians estimate that between 75 to 200 million lives were lost. Up to 60% of Europe's entire population wiped out. As the plague nears your own village, life begins to shift. Panic creeps in. Some residents flee to the countryside, desperate to outrun the infection. Others barricade themselves inside their homes, avoiding contact with anyone. Some fall to their knees in prayer, hoping divine mercy might spare them. Others throw all caution aside and live as if each day is their last. Local authorities do what they can to control the spread. Certain towns begin closing their gates to outsiders. Some enforce quarantines for new arrivals, 40 days of isolation before stepping on land. That's where the word quarantine comes from. 40 giorni, Italian for 40 days. But none of it stops the plague's relentless advance. It continues sweeping through the continent, leaving a trail of corpses and grief behind it. Now, it's in your town. The first sick household lies on the outskirts, near the road leading to the next village. They'd taken in a traveling merchant just days earlier. Now, every member of the family is bedridden. Whispers spread like wildfire. Some villagers insist the family brought this on themselves, claiming their suffering is punishment for hidden sins. Others quietly gather what they can and prepare to leave before it gets worse. The town priest begins leading urgent prayers for salvation. The few medical workers, likely not trained physicians but barbers, surgeons, midwives, herbalists, do what little they can. But medieval medicine offers few real answers. Common treatments often did more harm than good. Bloodletting, a widespread method, likely weakened patients whose bodies were already fighting a losing battle. Herbal remedies might have soothed some symptoms, but they couldn't stop the bacteria spreading through the body. Poultices applied to buboes sometimes caused them to rupture, which helped relieve pressure. But the agony was intense and recovery was still rare. Plague doctors, though not yet fully established in this era, were starting to suggest aromatic herbs and spices to cleanse the air. People clung to pomanders, posies, and sprigs of flowers to protect themselves from what they believed was poisoned air. Some took even more extreme measures. Groups of flagellants wandered from town to town, publicly whipping themselves in acts of penance, convinced that self-punishment might satisfy God's wrath. You can feel the fear tightening in your chest. A child next door gets sick. Then the baker. Then an entire family that lives by the church. The symptoms are unmistakable and terrifying. The healthy do what they can for the dying, but fear of catching the disease keeps many away. Countless people die in isolation, those brave enough to help try whatever remedies they can. Some bathe the infected in rosewater or vinegar, hoping to cleanse their bodies. Others apply strange poultices made of herbs, bread, or even dried toads and arsenic. Lancing the buboes becomes a desperate last resort. The moment the pus spurts out, anyone nearby is at risk. From a distance, you watch as the town sexton and his helpers begin digging graves. At first, they dig them one by one, but soon they resort to mass burial pits. The church bell rings constantly until the dead become so numerous that it rings no more. The stench of death blends with the already overwhelming smells of medieval life. Bodies are wrapped in whatever cloth can be found, sometimes nothing at all. In some of the hardest-hit areas, corpses lie in the streets for days, waiting for carts to come collect them. You notice something peculiar. Some groups seem less affected. The Jewish population, for instance, seems to have lower infection rates. Their religious rituals emphasize cleanliness, frequent hand-washing, and separate living quarters. But instead of learning from their practices, people accuse them of spreading the plague, often by poisoning wells. These lies spark violent massacres of Jewish communities across Europe. As the weeks go by, daily life continues to unravel. Fields go unplowed. Market stalls stand empty. Church attendance drops. The tavern, once full of laughter and talk, now feels somber. People drink to forget. Every sensation becomes suspect. A slight headache. Could it be the beginning of the plague? A sore under your arm? Just a muscle strain or something far worse? You constantly question every ache, every shiver. And what are your options, really? Stay where you are and risk catching the illness? Try to escape and risk taking it with you, or dying on the road. Barricade yourself inside and hope it never crosses your doorstep, or carry on as best you can, leaving your fate to divine will. There are no clear answers. Your body slowly sinks deeper into the straw bed beneath you. Muscles begin to unwind. You find a more comfortable position as your breath evens out. But the fear remains, lingering in the corners of your mind. Outside your home, the streets are growing quieter and far more dangerous. It's been weeks since the plague first arrived in your village. And now, it's no longer just near you, it's everywhere. The morning fog clings low to the earth, shrinking the world around you. making the streets feel more silent, more confined. You can barely make out the far end of your street through the mist, and maybe, in a way, that's a mercy. Fewer corpses to count. People are trying everything they can think of to avoid falling ill. The wealthier citizens have already escaped to their countryside estates, hoping that distance alone might protect them. But spoiler alert, it rarely does. The plague is relentless, trailing behind caravans and trade routes like a shadow that refuses to be outrun. You've started noticing something strange. Nobody smells bad anymore, or rather, everyone smells so bad that it's become normal. But there's one new scent that cuts through the stench. Vinegar. It's everywhere now. People are rinsing with it, gargling it, soaking cloths in it to cover their faces. The acidic tang burns your nostrils, but it's preferable to the other smell, the one leaking from homes marked with red crosses, the sweet, sickly stench of death. Remember those public bathhouses we talked about earlier? They're shut down now. Word has spread fast. Bathing, especially in warm water, is now believed to open up the skin and make the body more vulnerable to illness. Physicians are warning that water touching the skin can be dangerous. And when folks realized many of the bathhouse attendants were among the first to die, well, it became hard to argue with that. So now, people avoid full-body bathing entirely. The wealthy may still wipe themselves down using cloths soaked in rosewater or vinegar, but the poor make do with even less, maybe a damp rag to wipe the face and hands. Immersing yourself in a bath? That's no longer an option. It's simply too risky. But honestly, nobody is paying much attention to how anyone smells anymore. With death creeping through every alley and doorway, things like body odor fade into insignificance. What people are obsessed with now is the air itself. The miasma theory, the belief that foul air spreads disease, has fully taken root. And oddly enough, it isn't completely wrong. In its mnemonic form, the plague can be transmitted through the air, though no one yet understands how. To protect themselves, people come up with all sorts of creative methods. Sweet-smelling herbs and flowers are suddenly in high demand. Nosegays, small bouquets of fragrant plants, are clutched in hands or pinned to clothing, raised to faces whenever one walks past a suspicious smell. Wealthier townspeople wear pomanders, small, decorative balls filled with spices and herbs like ambergris, cloves, and cinnamon, hanging from chains at their waists or necks. These strong scents are believed to purify the air before it reaches your lungs. Some take it further, burning herbs and fragrant woods in their homes or even on street corners. The already heavy fog mixes with juniper, wormwood, rosemary, and thyme, all tossed into street fires to cleanse the space. And then there are the truly bizarre attempts. Some believe any strong odor can ward off the disease, even the horrid ones. One method involves breathing deeply over an open latrine, convinced the foul fumes will counteract the plague. Another involves pressing a handkerchief soaked in urine, yes, urine, over the nose and mouth. And believe it or not, that's not the end of it. Urine isn't just for inhaling, it's also used as a so-called treatment. People are advised to bathe in it, usually their own, to cleanse the body. Some are even told to drink it. Yes, medieval medicine really was that unhinged. Meanwhile, the true culprits, the rats and fleas, go about their business completely unchecked. Rats scurry through homes, marketplaces, and sewers, carrying infected fleas that hop from one warm body to the next. But no one suspects them. The idea that a minuscule insect bite could unleash such horror is far beyond what anyone can imagine in this time. Instead, as more bodies pile up, people turn to more familiar scapegoats. Jewish communities who tend to practice better hygiene due to religious rituals involving hand-washing and cleanliness appear to have lower infection rates. That should be a clue that cleanliness matters, but instead it stokes suspicion. Conspiracy theories erupt. People claim Jews are poisoning wells to spread the plague intentionally. This dangerous lie spreads almost as fast as the disease itself. Across Europe, these accusations lead to mass violence. Jewish families are rounded up and burned alive in some towns. In others, they're forced to convert to Christianity or face execution. Entire communities are destroyed, not by the plague, but by the hatred of their neighbors. The Pope even speaks out, condemning the violence and reminding people that Jews, too, are dying from the plague. But fear, bigotry, and ignorance prove stronger than reason. Other marginalized groups also face persecution. Lepers, already shunned and cast out, are blamed for spreading the disease. Foreigners, travelers, anyone who looks or acts different becomes a suspect. Even cats, thought by some to be the devil's familiars, are slaughtered in large numbers, which ironically allows the rat population to grow unchecked, and the plague to spread even faster. Back in town, those tasked with healing the sick are fighting a battle they simply can't win. Educated physicians, those trained in universities, are rare and mostly serve the nobility. The common people rely on a patchwork of practitioners: barber surgeons, herbalists, apothecaries, midwives, and empirics. Healers who learn through trial and error rather than formal schooling. These healers work with what little they know. Much of their medical understanding is rooted in the theory of the four humors, the belief that the body holds four fluids: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. To stay healthy, these fluids must remain in balance. Disease, they say, is the result of imbalance. So, naturally, treatment focuses on restoring this so-called balance. For plague victims, that often means bloodletting, cutting a vein to release excess blood. Leeches are used for the same purpose. Purging and vomiting are encouraged through harsh concoctions meant to rid the body of bad humors. None of it works. If anything, bloodletting only weakens patients whose bodies are already collapsing. Some healers lean toward herbal medicine. They create elaborate potions and pastes, sometimes using dozens of ingredients: opium, minerals, and even ground-up viper meat. The compound known as theriac becomes a popular but expensive option. More affordable remedies include poultices applied directly to the buboes or herbal teas to drink. Religious treatments are just as common. People pray fervently, make offerings, and join mass processions hoping that collective devotion might bring relief. The most intense religious movement? The flagellants. Groups of believers who roam from town to town, whipping themselves raw in dramatic public displays. They believe that by inflicting pain on themselves, they can earn God's forgiveness and stop the plague. Townspeople gather to watch, torn between fascination and dread. Yet, despite all the prayer, the bloodletting, the herbs, and the pain, nothing stops the relentless wave of death. As the situation worsens, a new figure emerges: the plague doctor. Though the iconic beaked mask won't become standard until later waves, these early physicians start adopting protective clothing. Long, waxed robes, gloves, hats, and boots, all meant to shield them from exposure. Some carry sticks or canes to examine patients without touching them directly. Following the miasma theory, they stuff herbs into the beak of their masks or keep pomanders close to their faces. Some even smoke tobacco, recently brought to Europe, believing the smoke will act as a purifier. Their treatments are limited and mostly ineffective. They lance buboes to drain pus, apply herbal pastes, administer vomiting-inducing mixtures, and bleed their patients. Still, they try. Many keep careful notes of symptoms and survival rates, hoping to understand the illness better. But without knowing the real cause, their efforts often lead nowhere. For the average victim, the presence of a plague doctor isn't a sign of hope. It's a sign that death is near. These physicians also serve as witnesses to last-minute wills and offer final comfort as life slips away. Even after death, problems continue. The bodies left behind become overwhelming. In ordinary times, the burial of the dead is a solemn, sacred process, anchored in tradition and ritual. The body would be carefully washed, dressed in clean garments, and placed out in view for a vigil before being laid to rest in consecrated ground, usually the churchyard. Prayers would be spoken, bells would toll, and the entire community would come together to mourn and say goodbye. But these are far from ordinary days. With the plague ravaging the land, death has become so overwhelming that the usual rites can't keep up. At first, the church bells ring for every soul lost, but eventually, even the tolling stops. There are simply too many dead to honor individually. Gravediggers are pushed far beyond their limits, unable to handle the constant demand. Coffins disappear first, then the burial shrouds. Soon, the bodies are just wrapped in whatever fabric can be found, or not wrapped at all, and dumped into massive graves dug outside town limits. In the most devastated areas, carts now roll slowly through the streets with a grim cry, "Bring out your dead." These collection carts are sometimes driven by criminals, spared punishment in exchange for doing the grisly work. Other times, they're manned by the desperate, those who've lost everything and are willing to do anything for a few coins. The burial pits themselves are horrific. Enormous trenches stacked with layer upon layer of corpses, each layer covered in quicklime to speed decay and suppress the smell. When one trench fills, another is dug. In some towns, the death toll is so staggering that the dead are left where they collapse, or shoved into abandoned homes, which are then burned to contain the infection. All the usual mourning practices, the rituals that once helped people make sense of grief, are largely abandoned. There's simply no time, no space, and too much loss. Survivors grow emotionally numb, focused solely on staying alive rather than making sense of the devastation. And survival isn't getting any easier. The very fabric of society is starting to fall apart. Farm fields go unharvested as peasants either succumb to the plague or flee their villages. Food becomes scarce. Markets shutter or only open sporadically. Critical services vanish as their providers fall ill. In certain towns, governments break down completely. Officials die off or desert their roles, leaving no one to enforce order. In others, emergency powers are handed over to hastily formed crisis committees, which begin implementing increasingly strict containment efforts, quarantines, travel bans, prohibitions against public gatherings. In coastal cities, isolation becomes standard protocol. Ships are ordered to anchor offshore for a set period, usually 40 days, before anyone can disembark. That's where the word quarantine comes from, 40 giorni, Italian for 40 days. On land, entire households are sealed inside if someone falls ill. Guards might even be posted at the doors to ensure no one leaves. These measures may seem cruel, but they aren't entirely irrational. Even without understanding germs or contagion, people begin to notice that reducing contact with the sick slows the spread. Primitive forms of social distancing emerge. People avoid gatherings, maintain space, and isolate the infected. For you, daily life no longer resembles what it once was. The structure of your days, once guided by market visits, church bells, and neighborly chats, has been shattered. Simple tasks now carry the weight of danger. Going to the market? Attending Mass? Visiting a friend? All potential death sentences. Your hygiene routines have changed drastically too. Where once you might have bathed at the public bathhouse weekly or monthly depending on your status, now those places are locked up. They're seen as breeding grounds for the disease. Instead, you now clean yourself with cloths soaked in strong-smelling vinegar, convinced that the sting in your nose will guard you from the toxic miasma. You carry a pomander, stuffed with herbs like lavender, thyme, or rosemary, pressed close to your face anytime you pass another person or walk by a home marked with the dreaded Red Cross. Your house, once simply dusty by modern standards, is now regularly fumigated with smoke. Juniper branches or rosemary are burned, filling every corner with their sharp, choking scent. Your eyes water, but if it offers any chance of protection, it's worth it. Even food and drink bring anxiety. Many believe that contaminated food can carry the plague, so preparing meals becomes a ritual of fear. Bread is carefully inspected for odd spots or mold, anything that might suggest poison. Water from communal wells is eyed suspiciously, especially after rumors spread of saboteurs, perhaps Jews, poisoning public sources. People increasingly turn to alcohol. Ale, beer, and wine are consumed with nearly every meal. They're not just preferred, they're trusted. The fermentation process, though not understood, seems to make these drinks safer than potentially tainted water. And it's observed. People who drink more alcohol often get sick less. Clothing also receives less care than before. Washing clothes is a difficult, time-consuming job. Heating water, scrubbing with lye soap, wringing, and hanging to dry. With death so close, few see the point. Some even believe that wearing clothes too often washed makes you more vulnerable, that the accumulated dirt and oils on your skin and garments act as a barrier against infection. This idea, like many others, has no scientific merit, but fear has a way of turning superstition into practice. Sleep, when it comes at all, is uneasy. Anxiety sits heavy on your chest. The sounds of nearby households, crying, coughing, or sudden silence haunt you through the night. And when sleep finally comes, your dreams offer little comfort. Nightmares replay the horrors of the day in twisted, symbolic loops. Still, despite the efforts, the plague marches on. Friends, neighbors, even family members, gone within days of the first fever. The lucky ones who recover are never the same. They're left weak, sometimes scarred, bearing physical reminders of the nightmare they've survived. You've heard the rumors. Whole villages with no survivors. Cities where half the population has vanished. Stories that sound like Judgment Day has arrived. Some say it's the wrath of God, others blame the air, the stars, or poisoned wells. But nobody guesses the real culprit: the rats. Rats that sneak through alleyways, hide in food stores, and make homes inside your walls. On their backs, fleas, and inside those fleas, Yersinia pestis, the bacteria behind all of this death. Sometimes the infection goes deeper, into the lungs, becoming pneumonic. And now it's no longer just the fleas. Coughs and sneezes carry death from person to person. This invisible, complex chain of infection will remain a mystery for hundreds of years. For now, people cling to whatever explanation they can. They try every method, some helpful, many harmful, and others entirely meaningless. And yet, life continues, somehow. People still get up and work if they're able. They still eat, still drink, still search for moments of humanity in the ruins. In the face of death, the will to live remains. As the sun sets once again, you return home. You cleanse your hands and face with vinegar water. The smell of rosemary smoke curls through the air as you eat a simple meal. From next door, you hear coughing. You force yourself not to dwell on it. Not tonight. Tomorrow will bring more fear, more bodies, more unanswered questions. But right now, you're alive. you breathe a little slower. The heavy weight of medieval life still rests on your chest, but tonight it doesn't crush you. You shift slightly in your bed, letting your limbs relax. The sting of vinegar in your nose, oddly comforting, reminds you that you're still fighting. Outside, in the darkened streets, you hear the slow rumble of the death cart. Its wheels grind over cobblestones, stopping here and there to gather those who didn't survive the night. Not everyone is dying. A few are managing to live. And that raises a question no one can seem to answer. Why? Why do some people fall ill and perish, while others, sometimes living in the same house, emerge untouched? Nobody knows the real answer, and they won't for centuries. But that doesn't stop the theories. Some believe it's divine judgment, God choosing who lives and who dies. Others point to astrology or the balance of bodily humors. A few, without understanding why, start to recognize patterns that seem to matter. One thing becomes clear: the rich often fare better. Not always. Plenty of nobles and wealthy merchants still die, but statistically, they survive more often than the poor. The reasons are invisible to the people of the time. Today, we know, the rich have advantages: better food, less crowded homes, the ability to leave infected areas, access to whatever passed for medical care. They also benefit from better hygiene. Servants can keep their homes cleaner. Rats are less drawn to places with fewer food scraps and waste. Clean bedding and clothes, though considered superstitious by some, turn out to matter more than anyone could know. Even if they don't understand the science, people notice. Something about cleanliness, space, and wealth seems to offer some protection. And in a world falling apart, even the illusion of control is something worth holding on to. They often have access to private wells or personal water sources, which are less likely to be contaminated. And perhaps, most crucially, the wealthy tend to interact with fewer people on a daily basis, which greatly limits their exposure to the pneumonic form of the plague, one that spreads directly from human to human through the air. Certain communities also manage better than others. In many cities, Jewish neighborhoods, with their religious customs that emphasize regular hand-washing and personal cleanliness, report noticeably lower infection rates. But instead of learning from these practices, most people respond with fear and suspicion, leading to violence and persecution rather than imitation. Monasteries and convents, despite being communal living spaces, also sometimes see reduced mortality. This is partly because many of them maintain strict routines involving cleanliness, hand-washing before meals and after various tasks, wearing clean robes, and managing waste in a more orderly way. They're also typically more physically removed from crowded towns and cities, which lowers their exposure further. As the Black Death continues its relentless sweep across Europe, a new professional figure slowly begins to take form: the plague doctor. We mentioned them earlier, but now let's examine more closely how these medieval frontline workers tried to protect themselves and what they actually did. The most iconic image, the plague doctor in a beaked mask, covered head to toe in waxed canvas or leather, doesn't actually become standard until later outbreaks. During the initial wave of the plague, there isn't yet a unified uniform, but physicians are already experimenting with protective clothing based on the belief in miasma, or poisonous air. What most of them do have in common is the use of overcoats made from waxed leather or canvas, materials they believe are more resistant to the foul air than ordinary fabric. Gloves are worn, sometimes even in multiple layers. Many carry wooden staffs or canes, which serve not only as walking aids, but also as tools to examine patients without having to touch them directly. Aromatics are also widely used. They fill small containers or masks with fragrant herbs and spices, believing the strong smells can purify the air they breathe. These mixtures include rosemary, mint, sage, wormwood, juniper, camphor, cloves, and myrrh. Wealthier doctors might use rare imports like ambergris or civet to enhance their personal protection. While none of these substances kill the actual bacteria, the masks may have unintentionally provided some limited barrier protection, both against flea bites and airborne transmission in the case of pneumonic plague. Plague doctors weren't just treating the sick. They had many other responsibilities. They examined suspected plague cases, declared quarantines, kept records of the dead, and often supervised burials. In some cities, they were even required to mark infected homes, sometimes painting large crosses or hanging cloths to warn others of the danger inside. As for their treatments, these were based entirely on the limited medical theories of the time. They would lance swollen buboes to release pus, apply herbal poultices, prescribe elaborate medicinal mixtures aimed at restoring balance to the body's humors, and perform bloodletting to purge the illness. While most of these treatments had no effect on the actual infection, lancing buboes may have offered some slight benefit by decreasing bacterial load in a few cases. Still, for the vast majority of victims, the outlook was grim. Without any real cure, mortality rates for untreated bubonic plague hovered between 60 and 90%. Pneumonic and septicemic forms were nearly always fatal, and even those who managed to recover often remained physically weakened or bore disfiguring scars from burst buboes. Yet, not every person exposed to the plague became sick. Today, we understand that roughly 15% of the population carries a genetic mutation that provides some natural resistance to the Yersinia pestis bacterium. These individuals might still be infected, but their bodies fight it off before it becomes severe. To people at the time, these survivors appeared to be divinely protected, or simply lucky. Others, unknowingly, protected themselves through what we'd now recognize as good hygiene. Even without understanding the reasons why, practices like regular hand washing, changing clothes, keeping the home clean, and managing waste helped lower their risk of contact with infected fleas. Some towns and cities, though lacking modern scientific knowledge, still implemented surprisingly effective public health strategies. They quarantined ships and travelers, isolated infected households, and buried the dead outside city limits in deep pits, reducing opportunities for the disease to spread. Venice, one of the busiest trade hubs in the medieval world, developed an especially advanced system. Incoming ships had to remain anchored for 40 days before crew or cargo could disembark, giving us the word quarantine from the Italian quarantagiorni. Goods from these ships were unloaded onto platforms and left exposed to the air, under the assumption that fresh air would neutralize the plague-carrying miasma. They even designated an entire island, Lazaretto Vecchio, as a quarantine hospital to isolate the sick from the rest of the city. Though their motivation was to protect the healthy, this isolation strategy also helped slow the pneumonic spread of the disease. Milan took a different, far more ruthless approach. When plague cases emerged, the city sealed infected homes completely, bricking up windows and doors with the sick still inside. The results were fatal for those trapped, but this brutal measure did sharply reduce the city's overall death toll. These early public health measures, however harsh, represent the beginning of observational medicine. Medieval officials noticed what seemed to work and enforced policies accordingly, even if they couldn't explain the reasons behind the outcomes. Still, for every helpful measure, there were countless ineffective, or downright harmful, practices. People wore dead toads around their necks, hoping they'd absorb the illness. They drank concoctions laced with mercury or arsenic, unintentionally poisoning themselves. Others sat in sewers breathing the fumes, applied animal dung to buboes, or consumed powdered unicorn horn, which was usually just narwhal tusk sold by unscrupulous merchants. The chaos of the plague years often derailed normal hygiene habits, sometimes for better, often for worse. Public bathhouses, once places of social gathering and cleanliness, were closed either by decree or by public fear. With bathhouses shut down, regular bathing decreased across much of the population. Yet at the same time, other forms of cleanliness became more frequent. People began washing their hands more consistently, especially after visiting public places or handling suspect items. They scrubbed their homes more thoroughly with vinegar, lye, and aromatic smoke. Items used by the sick were often discarded or burned, an early version of contamination control that, while primitive, showed a growing awareness of disease transmission. Clothing posed a particular challenge. Garments made of wool, linen, or cotton were difficult to wash properly in the absence of modern soap or laundry equipment. The process was long and laborious, requiring boiling water, strong lye soap, or even urine, and hours of scrubbing and drying. During the plague, people grew increasingly wary of washing clothes too often, believing that warm water opened the pores and made the body more vulnerable to miasma. Instead, clothes were aired out, fumigated with aromatic smoke, or dusted with herbal powders. The wealthy might have their garments cleaned and stored by servants. The poor often wore the same set of clothes for weeks, cleaning only the most visibly dirty spots when absolutely necessary. Unfortunately, this shift contributed to a rise in parasitic infestations. Lice, fleas, and scabies spread quickly through unwashed fabrics and bodies. The scratching they caused could break the skin, making it easier for secondary infections to take hold. Food hygiene suffered too. With so many farmers and food workers dead or gone, supply chains crumbled. In many areas, people were forced to eat whatever they could find, regardless of how fresh or properly prepared it was. Spoiled food brought on digestive illnesses that further weakened plague-stricken communities. Even water became a source of fear. Wells were rumored to be poisoned, especially by minority groups like Jews, which led some to avoid drinking water altogether. Alcoholic beverages became the preferred alternative. Fermented drinks like beer, ale, and wine were consumed daily, not just for enjoyment, but because they were seen as safer. And indeed, though no one knew why, the alcohol did help kill off waterborne pathogens. Some cities tried to maintain water quality by outlawing the dumping of waste near rivers and wells, but with so much death and disorder, these laws were rarely enforced. Still, Venice once again stood out. With its carefully managed rainwater collection systems and filtration methods, the city maintained relatively clean water supplies, likely contributing to its eventual recovery from the pandemic. As the months slowly give way to years, the first terrifying wave of the Black Death begins to recede. Not due to any deliberate human effort, but because of a combination of natural factors. A reduced population, either due to death or immunity, seasonal shifts that influence flea behavior, and possibly even changes in the plague bacterium itself, all contribute to its temporary retreat. What it leaves behind, however, is a society forever changed. The scale of depopulation is staggering. Estimates suggest that anywhere from 30% to 60% of Europe's population perished. This sharp reduction creates severe labor shortages, driving up the value of those who survived. Peasants and city laborers find themselves in a rare position to negotiate for better wages and improved conditions, accelerating the decline of the feudal system that had long bound them in servitude. The plague also reshapes ideas about cleanliness and public health. Observations linking filth with outbreaks of disease push some cities to introduce basic sanitation policies. Streets begin to be swept more frequently, waste disposal becomes better regulated, and clean water sources are more closely protected. Ironically, though, personal hygiene doesn't improve in the same way. Full-body bathing declines, largely because of the persistent belief that it opens the body's pores to disease, an idea strengthened by the closing of public bathhouses during the plague years. This trend continues for centuries, eventually reaching its peak during the 16th to 18th centuries, when infrequent bathing becomes fashionable, especially among Europe's upper classes. In place of traditional bathing, people adopt what we might call dry cleaning methods. Linen undergarments are changed regularly under the belief that the fabric draws impurities out of the skin. Powders and perfumes become popular, not to cleanse the body but to mask unpleasant smells. People clean only the visible parts of their body, dabbing away dirt rather than washing it away through immersion. Clothing styles shift too. Before the plague, fashion often favored form-fitting garments that accentuated the body. After the outbreak, looser, more concealing clothing becomes the norm. This change reflects both a new aesthetic and a deep-seated fear of exposure. More coverage is thought to protect against the invisible threat of miasma. Yet amid all this devastation, some survivors find themselves unexpectedly better off. With fewer mouths to feed and more resources to go around, many enjoy improved diets and living conditions. Archaeological findings suggest that those who made it through the Black Death and lived into the following decades were often taller, healthier, and longer-lived than generations before them. The pandemic also acts as a catalyst for both technological and cultural advancement. With labor in short supply and more expensive, there's now incentive to develop machines and tools that can reduce the need for manpower. The shared trauma of the plague seeps into art, literature, and philosophy, helping lay the emotional and intellectual groundwork for the Renaissance. But all of this progress comes at an unimaginable price. Entire communities are erased, families vanish, crafts and skills disappear with the people who once practiced them. The psychological scars left by such widespread suffering linger for generations. Perhaps the most lasting legacy is a shift in how people think about illness, cleanliness, and their own bodies. The association between bathing and disease becomes deeply ingrained and persists for centuries, leading to the infamous hygiene habits of early modern Europe. The plague also leaves behind a framework for dealing with future outbreaks. Quarantining the ill, restricting travel, fumigating objects and rooms, wearing protective clothing and using strong-smelling substances all become part of the response playbook. Some of these measures help. Others do more harm than good, but all of them influence how societies approach health in the years to come. As the worst of the crisis fades into memory, life slowly adjusts to a new rhythm. Fields are sown again, though fewer hands work them. Markets reopen, but prices rise due to the reduced labor force. Churches hold services for much smaller congregations. The familiar flow of medieval life returns, but in a version reshaped by catastrophe. For you, the time traveler standing in this fragile, recovering world, daily hygiene has changed. You no longer bathe in water, but clean your hands and face with vinegar-soaked cloths. You change your linen undergarments when possible, trusting they'll draw disease from your skin. When venturing into crowded places, you still carry a pomander filled with fragrant herbs, just in case the miasma still lingers. The home you live in may feel emptier now. Perhaps half your family is gone, or maybe you've moved altogether, seeking a new life in the ruins of another's. The smell of vinegar and herbal smoke has become part of the everyday sensory landscape. Alongside the ever-present odors of fire, animals, leather, and unwashed bodies, these scents no longer stand out. They've become the backdrop of your world. The terror of the plague years has dulled into a grim understanding that death is always nearby, and that understanding shapes how people think about health, hygiene, and mortality for generations. As you reflect on the trauma of survival, your body slowly relaxes. Your breath slows, the weight of those times settling over you like a heavy but familiar blanket. You shift slightly, sinking deeper into your bed, so unlike the scratchy straw pallets of medieval homes. Outside, the town begins to sleep. The sounds of death carts have faded, replaced by the normal noise of village life. For now, the plague didn't disappear all at once. It faded in waves, with new flare-ups erupting for years after the initial devastation. But now, with some time passed, people are beginning to rebuild, adjusting to smaller communities, quieter towns, and changed social structures. Let's take a deeper look at how hygiene specifically evolved in the immediate aftermath. One of the most lasting effects of the Black Death is the firm entrenchment of the miasma theory, the belief that disease travels through poisoned or foul-smelling air. While the idea existed before, the experience of the plague seems to confirm it for many. People notice that those who breathe the same air as the sick often fall ill themselves. This leads to a heightened awareness of odor and air quality. City governments pass laws restricting activities known to produce bad smells. Leather tanning, animal slaughter, cesspit cleaning, all are pushed outside city limits or confined to specific zones. Venice, already a leader in public health, responds swiftly by establishing a permanent health magistracy in 1348. This new authority oversees sanitation, investigates potential outbreaks, and ensures that streets are cleaned, goods inspected, and waste managed. Other cities in Italy follow suit, forming what we now recognize as Europe's earliest boards of public health. These institutions develop increasingly organized approaches to managing illness, quarantining the sick, improving sanitation, and controlling movement. The obsession with clean air spills into private homes as well. People continue to rely heavily on aromatics, herbs, incense, scented cloths to purify their surroundings. The wealthy, in particular, take to fumigating their clothes before storage and frequently changing garments to stay fresh. Still, actual washing remains suspect. The belief that warm water makes the body vulnerable to infection has become deeply rooted. Instead of bathing, people wipe themselves down, what we'd now call spot cleaning, using cloths dipped in vinegar or scented waters. They wash their hands and faces, and occasionally other parts, but rarely the entire body. The undergarments closest to the skin become central to hygiene. A fresh linen shirt is thought to absorb bodily impurities, and visible linen at the collar or cuffs becomes a marker of both cleanliness and status. Among the wealthy, grooming is more about appearance than sanitation. Hair is brushed and styled, complexions are treated with creams, and body odor is masked with perfumes. Teeth are cleaned with herbal mixtures, cloths, or rudimentary brushes, though understanding of dental hygiene remains limited. The poor have far fewer options. They might wash in streams during warmer weather, but do so less often, thanks to new fears about water carrying disease. They own fewer clothes and have limited access to herbs, perfumes, or other luxuries. Still, many try to maintain some level of cleanliness, especially of the hands and face, which are most frequently exposed. Communal bathing, once common in medieval Europe, suffers a steep decline. Many bathhouses close during the plague and never reopen. Those that do often become associated more with prostitution than with hygiene. This decline isn't universal. Regions with strong bathing cultures like Scandinavia or parts of Eastern Europe continue the practice, but in much of Western Europe, public bathing fades into disuse, Waste management also evolves in response to the devastation. Before the plague, cities dealt haphazardly with refuse. Waste was dumped into streets, rivers, or poorly maintained cesspits. Afterward, there's a push to regulate disposal more strictly. Streets are ordered to be cleaned. Waste is to be moved outside city walls. Wells are protected from contamination. Though enforcement is inconsistent, the idea that public health is a civic responsibility begins to take hold. Water sources in particular come under closer watch. Wells are covered and guarded. Tanning, dyeing, and butchering are banned near water supplies. In some areas, professional water carriers are hired to deliver cleaner water to households, though at a price. Food safety sees its own evolution. Market inspectors become more vigilant, especially when it comes to perishable items like meat and fish. Rules are enacted about where and when certain foods can be sold. At home, people cook food thoroughly and use generous amounts of herbs, not just for taste, but for their supposed medicinal power. Garlic, onion, rosemary, and similar strong herbs are prized for their cleansing properties. Alcohol continues to be the preferred drink for many. Without understanding the reason, people notice that those who drink ale, beer, or wine tend to stay healthier than those who drink water. The fermentation process kills many pathogens, giving these drinks an unexpected protective benefit. Finally, the way people view animals, especially those associated with filth, also changes. Rats, though not yet known to be plague carriers, are increasingly seen as symbols of disease and are targeted for extermination in some areas. Unfortunately, these efforts are rarely effective enough to prevent future outbreaks. Ironically enough, cats might have actually played a role in keeping rat populations under control and, by extension, slowing the spread of the plague. Yet, even before the Black Death struck, cats had already been cast in a dark light, linked to witchcraft and demonic forces. When the plague arrived and panic set in, these associations only deepened in some regions, resulting in periodic cat massacres. These killings likely made the rat problem even worse, unintentionally aiding the disease's spread. Dogs, on the other hand, fared somewhat better. They were appreciated for their usefulness in herding livestock, hunting, and guarding property. Still, stray dogs were often seen as carriers of disease, and, during outbreaks, were frequently culled as a precaution. Meanwhile, fleas and lice, the true carriers of bubonic plague and typhus, were ever-present companions in medieval daily life. Most people lived with these parasites as a matter of course. Delousing became a routine part of grooming, involving careful combing to remove lice and their eggs from the hair. Herbal treatments were applied to the body and bedding to deter infestations, though the true danger of these pests remained unknown. These pests were certainly unpleasant, but they were accepted as unavoidable. The connection between these insects and the transmission of deadly diseases wouldn't be understood until centuries later, in the late 19th century. Only then did scientists piece together the grim chain, from flea to rat to human. As time wore on and the raw trauma of the Black Death slowly gave way to a new normal, hygiene practices began to shift. Some of the more extreme behaviors faded, replaced by more measured routines. Public bathhouses, once shuttered during the peak of the crisis, began to reopen in certain areas, though they never regained their former popularity. People resumed washing their clothes and linens with more regularity. The obsessive reliance on aromatic substances to purify the air became less widespread, although it remained a common practice whenever illness seemed near. On the public level, many of the emergency measures adopted during the plague became more structured and permanent. Quarantine rules for incoming ships and travelers were formalized into law. systems for monitoring and reporting disease outbreaks began to take shape. Regulations concerning waste disposal, water purity, and food safety were expanded and enforced more consistently. These developments took root most strongly in the Italian city-states, Venice, Florence, Milan, regions that had suffered some of the worst early outbreaks and faced repeated resurgences in later years. Their innovations would go on to influence broader European public health systems, adapting gradually to local resources and conditions. For individuals navigating life in this post-plague world, personal hygiene was a complex blend, an intersection of practical cleanliness, medical theories, many of which were flawed, religious obligations, and societal expectations. Practices varied greatly based on region, class, profession, and personal habits. A Venetian merchant, for instance, might begin his day with a rosewater rinse for his face and hands, change into a fresh linen shirt, and apply a touch of fragrance before heading to the regulated city markets. He'd return home to a house maintained by servants, and perhaps consult a physician who balanced his advice with humoral theory. Meanwhile, a peasant woman in the French countryside might wash with stream water, wear the same woolen dress for weeks, don a clean apron for church, and use folk remedies passed through generations to tend to her family's ailments. In monasteries, hygiene took a more ritualized form. A Benedictine monk would follow strict hand-washing protocols before meals, don clean robes, eat communally with prayers and rituals, and assist in the infirmary where ancient texts and lived experience guided treatment. Despite their different routines, these individuals all shared one thing: a world forever changed by plague. The Black Death had stripped away any illusions of safety, demonstrating how indiscriminate and devastating invisible threats could be. It blurred class lines in death, sparing some, taking others, and leaving no one truly safe. This shared trauma reshaped generational attitudes toward cleanliness and mortality. Some hygiene habits were institutionalized, others softened with time. Fear-driven responses like isolation and aromatic fumigation remained common during later outbreaks. At the same time, governments took on a more proactive role in community health, while many ordinary people developed a quiet fatalism, an understanding that death could arrive suddenly, no matter how clean or prepared one might be. The practices that emerged from this crisis ranged from helpful to irrelevant to outright harmful. Improved waste management and food safety likely prevented some illness. Less bathing may have had little impact on plague itself, but might have worsened skin issues. Aromatics, while ineffective against microbes, offered a sense of control and comfort. What surprises many modern observers is how long some of these habits persisted. For centuries after the plague, bathing remained suspect. Public health strategies born from the Black Death laid the foundation for institutions that would evolve into modern disease control systems. Even today, when facing outbreaks, we still rely on strategies like isolation, quarantine, and heightened hygiene, updated with germ theory, but emotionally echoing those medieval fears. The patterns are strikingly familiar: the panic of the first wave, the scramble for answers, and the gradual formation of new norms. We saw them again during the COVID-19 pandemic. Just like us, medieval survivors moved forward, carrying an awareness of vulnerability that altered their everyday routines. They washed more, avoided bad smells, used protective herbs, monitored their neighbors for signs of illness, and passed these habits on to their children, building the roots of European hygiene traditions. As you settle into bed, consider that distant past. Picture medieval hands dipping into vinegar water, the sting of sharp smells in the air. Your muscles begin to relax, your breathing slows, and your mind lingers for a moment in that ancient world, before returning gratefully to the warmth of your clean sheets and modern medicine. Your body feels heavy and calm now, like you're slowly sinking into the comfort beneath you. The haunting image of plague doctors in their beaked masks drifts into the shadows of memory, like a scene from a dream. These doctors, with their bird-like silhouettes, were among the most peculiar responses to the plague's horrors. Let's take a closer look. The most iconic version of the plague doctor outfit emerged in the 17th century, thanks to a French physician named Charles Delorme. But its components had been gradually developing since the aftermath of the First Great Plague. The full costume included a long coat, often waxed leather or treated canvas, covering the body from neck to ankle, along with gloves, boots, a wide-brimmed hat, and the unforgettable beaked mask. The coat's slick surface helped prevent fleas from clinging. This outfit was meant to shield every inch of skin, acting as a barrier between the doctor and the disease-ridden world. But it's the mask we remember. That exaggerated beak, sometimes stretching up to 8 inches long, wasn't just an eerie flourish. It served a specific purpose: to filter the air through strong-smelling substances. Based on the miasma theory, which blamed disease on bad air, the mask was packed with herbs, flowers, spices, camphor, or vinegar-soaked sponges. The doctor's breathing passed through these scented layers, supposedly purifying the air before it entered the lungs. Common ingredients included lavender, mint, rose petals, cloves, amber, and even laudanum, an opium tincture. Some of these had mild antibacterial qualities, but the mask's real protective power came from covering the mouth and nose, reducing exposure to respiratory droplets carrying pneumonic plague. Plague doctors also carried wooden canes, roughly 3 feet in length. These served many functions: examining patients from a distance, directing crowds to maintain space, and sometimes holding additional aromatic agents for extra protection. Interestingly, these weren't usually elite physicians. They were often lower-ranked practitioners, young doctors, or even municipal hires with limited training, brought in because other doctors had already fled. Their responsibilities extended beyond treatment. They recorded deaths, conducted basic autopsies, enforced quarantine, and supervised burials. In some cities, they were required to stay on duty and could be fined for leaving their posts. Their treatments were shaped by the humoral theories of the time: bloodletting, herbal infusions, poultices on buboes. Few, if any, actually helped against the bacteria. Sometimes lancing a bubo might relieve pressure, but recovery was rare. The presence of the plague doctor often meant death was close, not hope. They witnessed last wills, gave final comforts, and became walking symbols of mortality. Over time, this eerie image was absorbed into culture. The plague doctor became a character in Italian commedia dell'arte and remains a staple of Venetian carnival masks, a reminder of the past's horrors turned symbolic art. As plague returned in waves, ordinary people also adjusted their hygiene habits. The initial outbreak of 1347 to 1351 was just the beginning. Full bathing remained suspicious, but changing linen more frequently became a substitute. People believed linen absorbed bodily impurities. Clean meant no visible filth or bad smells, not sterilization. Faces and hands received special attention. Teeth were wiped with cloths, breath freshened with rinses, and hair combed meticulously to manage lice. Perfumes, powders, and scented objects became essential. The wealthy carried pomanders and embroidered handkerchiefs soaked in fragrance. The poor used whatever herbs they had. Toothbrushes were still centuries away, but people improvised with twigs, cloth, and rinses. Hair was washed more regularly than bodies, and barbers served both grooming and medical roles: cutting hair, trimming beards, extracting teeth, and offering bloodletting. Women's grooming often happened at home. Wealthy women had maids to assist with elaborate hairstyles and cosmetics. Beauty routines involved toxic compounds like lead and arsenic to achieve the prized pale skin. Even lower classes used natural substitutes: beetroot for rouge, soot for brows. All of this happened in homes filled with smoke, candlelight, and minimal sanitation. Water had to be fetched by hand, waste was dumped in pits or streets, and food spoiled easily. Yet, within these constraints, people still pursued cleanliness as best they could, adapting to their reality with resourcefulness. Bathing habits differed across regions. Southern Europe retained more frequent washing, influenced by Roman and Islamic traditions. Eastern Europe embraced steam baths. Social class shaped hygiene too. Nobles had private facilities and imported perfumes, while the poor shared wells and washhouses. Monastic orders had structured routines. Muslims washed before prayer. Jewish communities upheld ritual cleanliness through practices like mikveh bathing. Despite their vast differences, all of medieval Europe shared a concept of cleanliness shaped by ritual, smell, appearance, and moral purity, not germ theory. Their habits were logical within their worldview. They found effective solutions even without understanding bacteria: vinegar as disinfectant, masks as crude respirators, and quarantine as genuine containment. In facing catastrophe, they adapted. Their innovations laid foundations for modern public health. The Black Death did more than reshape hygiene. It altered society. Labor shortages empowered workers, eroding feudal structures. Faith in religious authority declined when prayers failed to halt the plague. Medicine began its slow pivot to empiricism. And through it all, people kept trying. They washed, they combed, they cleaned. Not because they understood microbes, but because they understood survival. The story of medieval hygiene is more than soap and water. It's a testament to human resilience. So now, as you lie still, let your breath slow. Let your mind release the weight of history. The images of vinegar washes, linen shifts, and beaked masks fade. You feel warm, heavy, safe. The streets are quiet now, the plague cart's gone. Just peace, just sleep.